let me know. How do you feel about this peace deal?
I'm afraid I'm going to be on the negative side. There are two things that this deal reminds me of. First of all, Hamas strategy has been taking hostages from the beginning and then getting a payoff. They're getting a massive payoff. At this point, they're expecting 2,000 terrorists to be released. Many of them pre-October 7th and post-October 7th. The second thing, when you actually look at the language of the deal, it is so reminiscent of all the stuff we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, all the things that didn't work. And with the Trump administration, we were supposed to leave all these things behind. Yet here we are doing this again. You look at the text of the deal, international monitors, reconstruction. No, we're going to turn Gaza into Switzerland. All we just have to do is put in a whole lot of money in there. We have all sorts of international organization, international force. This is how we got into Iraq and Afghanistan. This is how we got into nation building. And we're completely ignoring the reality that there's Islamic terrorism there. And that is there because a whole lot of the population is actually believes in it. We are ignoring the Islam factor. Toward the end, we, insert something in there about, having some dialogue about peaceful coexistence. So we didn't deal with what was really going on in Afghanistan, which was jihad, which was Islam. We did not deal with it in Iraq. And now we're once again playing the same tired game. We're even bringing Tony Blair out of retirement to once again give us the same Afghanistan, Iraq war stuff.
I think what you're saying is very sobering. Do you really believe that America, though, will enter into nation building in Gaza? Do you think that we're going to be dumping a bunch of money there and putting boots or, wingtip shoes on the ground? Or do you think that President Trump is going to rely upon nations or states within the region to be following through on rebuilding Gaza and managing it?
Now, I certainly hope we don't actually put boots on the ground, God forbid, or put money into it. But realistically speaking, we've done this also again in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had all these dreams where other nations were going to be shouldering the weight. We were going to have Arab partners. Remember Bush talking about Arab partners. The peace deal also talks about Arab partners. There aren't any Arab partners that are going to do this for us. That's a fantasy.
Oh, really? So you think that America is going to be the one directing all of this, or Israel, or who do you think is going to take the lead?
Well, the peace deal, again, just going with the actual text of it, creates some sort of Gaza Transitional Authority. President Trump has a titular title at the head of it. Tony Blair, who currently certainly is now representing England or any other country except probably us, is in theory going to be running it. So, if we're expecting anybody else to actually be doing this, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be us. And I don't want it to be us. I don't think any American wants to be involved in nation building yet again. I hope we do not get involved in this. But throughout the process, I've been warning that these various agreements actually obligate us to be involved, to act as mediators. And if we're expecting anybody else to do this, to go ahead and disarm Hamas, that is not happening. We had this deal in Lebanon where Hezbollah was supposed to be disarmed. And it turned out the Lebanese government is not actually capable of disarming them. So they're not getting disarmed. I think we're going to see the same exact thing play out in Gaza. There's zero chance that Hamas is going to allow itself to be disarmed. Worst case scenario, actually, is that the agreement in theory provides for some sort of buyback, weapons buyback, and a transference program. Yeah, it's like, they're going into Detroit and doing gun buyback. Who's paying for this?
I didn't know that. Well, I hope we better not be paying for gun buybacks from Hamas. Why would Tony Blair have any standing? He is, his legacy is one of, I would say, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think he is the one that began the destruction of the United Kingdom with the mass importation of Islam into the UK. Does that actually give him any credibility in terms of wisdom and understanding that he could navigate or direct anything of this magnitude?
It might give him credibility with Hamas. People in the Blair government have actually in the past come out and said they deliberately used immigration as a political strategy to fundamentally transform the UK. So It's certainly responsible for a situation where Muslim terrorists are not only on the ground in the UK, they're running parts of the country. The government is bending over backward, arresting people for saying anything negative about Islam. So you can see with that kind of track record why they might think that Tony Blair and Hamas would be great partners.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, well, who do you think is going to be involved in the Middle East? I was interested. I mean, I have no idea why Turkey is involved in this. Qatar, of course, is a bad actor, but I believe, okay, this sounds naive. I am not naive, but I'm hoping what my gut tells me is true, that in entering into his first term in January, that the president saw that he's going to need to get Arab nations on side just to make this happen, because he wants to make it happen. And for whatever reason, that is his policy to bring an end to this war. So I suspect that there's a possibility that his use of Qatar is strategic more than truly an affinity. Okay, you may scoff at that. And I'm just wondering if Qatar is just being used because they are, of course, friends and supporters of Hamas, and I'm wondering if Qatar would be involved in this effort in Gaza to reform Gaza, rebuild Gaza, disarm Hamas. You say that won't happen one way or the other. If Turkey would actually have boots in the ground, that would bother me very much, having Turkey in Gaza. That would not be a good thing. Egypt and Jordan. Egypt, well, what are your thoughts about that? And then Saudi Arabia and the UAE aren't seemingly involved at all at this point.
Well, the good thing about President Trump is that when it comes to international matters, he is strategic. And unlike, say, the Bush administration, George W. Bush decided we're going to liberate Iraq and democratize. And then he didn't waver from that. He just stayed embedded in that. And then Obama came in, and again, it was, we're going to stay embedded in this. Because really, for a lot of administrations, they start doing something, then it's really hard for them to pivot. President Trump has shown that he can pivot. And I think that's the best possible read for this, is that he is going to be willing to pivot. He's done that in the past, even with these negotiations before. We've seen him do that with Ukraine, for example, and Russia. So I think the best, hope for this is that, yes, he's going to intend to pivot. I think he's been fairly cynical. We've had these comments about Turkey taking over Syria. He said it openly. No past administration would have ever said something like that. On the other hand, he is playing footsie with these people. And I think there are people in this administration who are not good, who have taken money from Qatar, have taken money from Islamic interests in the past. And that is a problem. I think President Trump has been pretty good at playing this so far. We just hope that he maintains that kind of balance, and he's willing to pull the United States out of this as soon as it's not in our interest anymore, because past administrations would not have pulled out, and past administrations got us into the Iraq war and just kept us there while hundreds and then thousands of Americans kept on dying. So we definitely do not want anything like that in Gaza.
Yeah, I like the point that Trump is always willing to pivot. He can pivot in one day from 180 degrees. And, he has said things in the past during the campaign or at the beginning of the administration that I thought were worrisome about immigration or what have you. And then there's a pivot, and then there's another pivot. And so it seems to me that his flexibility and his willingness to bounce around can be very scary from moment to moment, but ultimately he's pretty much on track, I think, overall. Don't you agree? Or
President Trump sends up a lot of trial balloons, which is why it's good to react to them, to President know how we feel about things, but at the same time, not to panic too much over any particularly given thing. And we've seen in the past that people who panicked were later proven to be foolish, because President Trump does, among other things, react to what he sees from his base. So I think
that's a good point.
It's important to express our concerns, but not to freak out too much.
Do you believe that, some supporters of Israel, I had Robert Spencer on earlier, and he is utterly horrified by this peace deal. we're calling it the Hudna deal, but anyway. But it seems to me that the first step of getting the hostages out, and of course, on balance, releasing some of the worst murderers, in prison today, is a sobering thought. But getting the hostages out is worthy, not only because they're being tortured and abused so cruelly, and their families deserve to have them home if that's possible, but also because it's a stumbling block preventing Israel from doing certain kinds of decisive moves if need be. And so after those hostages come home and the 2,000 or 1,700 murderers are sent off to Gaza, do you think that if Hamas makes a move that is contrary to whatever agreement is finalized, that Israel will be free to respond accordingly because now the people, the victims or the hostages are home?
That's the big question. Hamas has had two demands all along. The first one is obviously the mass release of terrorists, but the big one, the unconditional one, the one that they absolutely demanded, was that Israel would not be able to go back in. And this peace deal appears to create this kind of structure where Israel cannot go back in, where there is a transitional authority in theory under the United States that is going to be managed by some sort of international support force, which sounds like the UN peacekeepers without the UN logo, one that would be in charge of everything and that will actually moderate and negotiate, and that will be engaging in deconfliction with Israel. So if President Trump actually sticks to these terms, that would be a complete disaster. If President Trump does what he did after the original ceasefire and says, okay, well, Hamas broke the deal, it's not my problem anymore.
I love that.
Yeah, that would be the ideal. So the question is, are we putting this kind of big structure in place? Is the United States behind it? Is President Trump behind it? Or is it just really a stalking horse?
Well, to me, when looking at the alternatives, if Egypt, who is, ostensibly no friend of Hamas, or Saudi Arabia, who is not, if they put any military or policing force in Gaza, it seems to me that Hamas would either be battling them, which would cause, I would think, a violent response, or they're going to have to clean, or they're going to have to turn over their weaponry. I just don't understand how, for instance, Egypt, again, or Saudi Arabia or Jordan would go in and allow Hamas to continue. However, with Turkey and Qatar, that would be a different matter altogether because they're wholly in support of Hamas. So do you see that that it depends upon this so-called peacekeeping force? And in essence, what it could do, when I think about it, is set up Arabs against, I'm not trying to say Arabs against Arabs, but if Hamas becomes violent again, they will be actually in defiance of other Arab governments and forces. And that takes it away from Israel having to be butting up against Hamas or, in some kind of peacekeeping or policing of Gaza. It seems to me that it's a much better thing if these Arab countries are doing it because of the dynamic of Arab Muslim against Arab Muslim.
I mean, it would be if that were actually the case. I don't think any Muslim country is going to come in and fight Muslim terrorists, with the possible exception of ISIS or maybe Al-Qaeda. They're certainly not going to fight the Muslim Brotherhood on the ground in this kind of way. And if you just really look at the breakdown of some of these countries, Jordan's king is barely in power. He's afraid every day that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to overthrow him. He's not going to send off troops to fight Hamas in Gaza. He has no reason to do that. And he doesn't even have the real capabilities to do so. Saudi Arabia, likewise. Bush talked about all these Arab partners that would help stabilize Iraq. None of them actually followed through. Ditto for Afghanistan. Muslims are not going to fight terrorists who fight in the name of Islam for the most part, unless they view them as like Al-Qaeda or ISIS as actually being anti-Muslim because they're actually declaring other Muslims to be apostates, in which case they have a license to go ahead and fight them. And even that takes a lot of work. Even that takes a lot. We've seen how fast they recognize.
It's a huge risk for them to do that because they do not want to stir up anti-government feelings in their own or movements in their own nation. So I would think it would be a great risk. Then who the heck is this peacekeeping force? I mean, because we know that the UN can't keep peace. It doesn't keep peace. It's never kept peace. It didn't keep peace in Lebanon. I think they're a bunch of cowards. I don't know if they recruit waiters and waitresses to be peacekeepers, but they seem to me as they're not even soldiers. I don't even know if they're always armed. I don't think they are. So if it's not a Muslim nation, which I was kind of thinking that they were going to have to do that to make this work, if it were French or, I mean, is France going to send in the military? Who would do this?
So we have two options. One is it's going to be Muslim countries, but they're not going to fight Hamas. They're going to protect it from Israel. Option two is it's going to be the French or the usual UN peacekeeping force types. They're going to come in and they're certainly not going to fight Hamas. They're going to try to maintain some sort of separation line between Israel and Hamas, behind which Hamas will be able to function as usual, which is, again, the same thing we see in Lebanon.
Well, can Israel, having this huge, what do you call it, a border around like a no-go zone or demilitarized zone? It's not demilitarized, though. The zone around the outline of Gaza that Israel will be occupying, which I think is ironic because now we're back to actually technically a real occupation of part of the Gaza Strip, if this deal goes through as I understand it. A buffer zone, that's the word I was looking for. If Israel's in, or the IDF, in this buffer zone, would that give them enough oversight to understand what is going on during the reconstruction of Gaza? Are they going to be able to detect if there are more tunnels being built? Does this give you any cause of relief that at least Israel has that buffer zone? And it's a tremendous size if you take it all together. I don't know. I heard someone say, or someone said maybe even 50% of the strip would be part of this buffer zone.
One thing to understand about Gaza and about Israel in general, we're talking about, certainly for Americans, really, really small pieces of land. We're talking about pieces of land that are easily drivable, easily walkable.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is Israel had oversight, not the same degree, before October 7th. They didn't draw the right conclusions. They believed that Hamas really intended to support the ceasefire at the time, that what Hamas wanted was more money through Qatar, and that they were not actually serious about attacking. They were just playing games. So you have to draw the right conclusions, just like we had to draw the right conclusions before September 11th, and we did not. And the bigger issue really is what Hamas is going to be doing during this so-called reconstruction, which is, first of all, siphoning off as much aid as possible, because one of the things that the agreement says is that aid is going to go right back through the UN. We've seen that the UN is working hand in glove with Hamas. And the UN is going to be the only real mechanism, apart from the Red Crescent, which is the Muslim Red Cross, that's going to be doing it. So Hamas is going to be able to siphon off as much aid as it wants. And it's important to understand Hamas controls the so-called civilian government on the ground. So the so-called politicians locally, the police, everything is controlled by Hamas. So the civilian government that they're going to build up is going to be the Hamas government. And what is very likely to happen is that Hamas is going to say, okay, we're disarming our terrorists, we're handing them over to the police, and hi, Ahmed, I'm the terrorist, and well, Ahmed, I'm going to give my guns over to you, and perhaps we're even going to pay for this buyback program, in which Ahmed hands over the gun to Ahmed, and the Hamas terrorist becomes the Hamas police officer. This is not really speculation, because this is exactly what the PLO did back in the Oslo days.
Yeah, yes. Well, the PLO still puts out, those little posters online and hangs them in the streets of Judea and Samaria, or to the Arab or Muslim areas of Judea and Samaria, and they are police officers. I mean, there's been investigations exposing time after time that these so-called martyrs, terrorists, that take actions, terrorist actions and are killed in the process are actually part of the police force or the, military force of the PLA. So, or the PA. So, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about them handing these weapons over to police, Gazan police. And of course, the people of Gaza, the vast majority of them, maybe, if it's only 80 or 70% support for Hamas right now, where are you going to get your police force? It's going to have to come. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. There isn't another. Everybody who's armed and has military training in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank is a member of one of a number of terrorist groups, whether it's Hamas, PLO, Islamic Jihad, one of the Al-Qaeda or ISIS variants. The bottom line is those people who have that kind of training and equipment are going to be terrorists. There isn't anybody else there to draw on.
Well, I was just caught a clip of this woman. I think I've seen it before, a Gazan, and she was so evil sounding. And she said, if America thinks this or that, that they're going to end our fight, they are so wrong because they can't do away with Hamas because there is Hamas in every family, in every home in Gaza. There is no family in Gaza that does not have Hamas as part of as their part of their family or their home. And that might be a slight over exaggeration because there may be 5% or 10%, whatever it might be. But I would think the vast majority of homes and families are supporting Hamas, even though they're angry that they've been, had a really tough 2 years. So no, we're not going to be able to destroy the ideology this way because we're going to rebuild, make it the Singapore of the Middle East, another Qatar, another UAE, and put up skyscrapers and make it prosperous. But if that is done, because Gaza's almost leveled, it's not leveled, but it's almost leveled. If they're building big, beautiful, tall skyscraper apartment buildings and America's not paying for it, isn't there a higher cost for the Gazans? I know that sounds so Pollyannish because in 2005, 2006, 2007, the whole idea was we pull out of the strip and then give them what they want, self-government, entirely self-government, autonomy, and this is what happens. But after Gaza's been leveled to the ground, nearly, and 2 years of suffering and seeing what the might of Israel truly is, that they are not weak as they assume, and then it's rebuilt, but it would be far better than it was, obviously, before if they put all that money into it. Are they going to be willing to destroy that newly built Gaza Strip?
If you look at pictures of Gaza before the war, they had a lot of nice things. They had 5-star hotels. They had high-end restaurants. They still have some very nice restaurants and supermarkets, not the stuff you see on social media. But there are key families. When she says, there's Hamas in every family, what that means is really there are key large clans that dominate life in Gaza. Those clans have a lot of money. They have a lot of wealth. They have a lot of power. You can look at some of the mansions that existed before the war. There was plenty of money in there. They still chose to go ahead and start this war. Are they going to be willing to do it again? Almost certainly, because the bottom line is that they have a compelling religious belief in what they're doing. And that's one thing we simply do not understand. We think, we thought this way in Iraq, also in Afghanistan, that we were going to bring in a lot of money into that. There's going to be opportunities for investment and trade, and we're going to give them a better life. And they took all of that, and they said, we'd rather have Islam, we'd rather have jihad. And until we understand that we are never going to make any progress, forget about Israel or Gaza, anywhere in the Middle East, in the Muslim world in general, we do not understand that they take their religion seriously, that they take their beliefs seriously, and that they are willing to endlessly fight this war over them. And we know we're going to put a lot of money into there. Where is that money actually going to go? It's going to go into the hands of the same wealthy Hamas tycoons who were running it before. The Taliban were not financed by drugs. We think they were financed by selling drugs. No, they were financed by foreign aid. They were financed by all the money we put into Afghanistan. We built the roads, we built the wells, we built buildings, we built schools, we did all this stuff. the Taliban took a piece of the action at every turn. Hamas is going to do the same exact thing. They've been doing it all along. They're going to do it again. They're going to use that money. Yes, they're going to use it to rearm and prepare for another war, but they're also going to use it to make themselves very rich. So you're going to see the same 5-star hotels, the same expensive restaurants, the same mansions, and we're going to be the ones paying for it.
And the construction companies, I remember, I don't know if it was 6 months, 9 months, or a year before the election, that the construction companies are utterly corrupt. Everything in Gaza, of course, just like the Palestinian Authority, is corrupt. Everyone just gets paid for what under the table. And the construction companies just make a fortune building, and they keep others out. There's no competition. And I saw that they were talking about construction contracts for rebuilding Gaza being handed to the very same people and the same companies, the same families that were doing this before, and maybe even, try to remember, it doesn't matter the details, but that was shocking to me. So you're confirming to me or clarifying to me again that on some of these very salient points. I will say this, the jihad continues. It is forever until the end of this age. I would never believe that this deal forces Hamas to repent of evil and turn from their wicked ways and to follow the one true God. I know that none of that is happening, but I'm trying to think of a way. The day after always had to come. That has to come. If it was a 5-year war, a 1-year war, whatever it is, 10-year war, there still has to be a day after. And so something has to happen. Now, this is Trump and Jared Kushner's and Witkoff's and whomever else contributed to it. This is their plan. My whole idea was just you've got to keep Hamas from being part of the government. It seems to me that what you're saying is they're going to be, if this plan goes forward the way that you see it as or interpret it as being written, what would you do if you were going to write this peace deal or a plan for the day after? What would you do that would have ultimately been different? Keeping in mind that you have to decide whether the hostages are coming home and that does bear a cost in the negotiation.
The bottom line is the hostages cannot be the fundamental objective of the war, because if you make the hostages the objective, what you're doing is rewarding terrorists for taking hostages. You're incentivizing them to take more hostages. There was a reason originally we decided we were not going to negotiate with terrorists, and then we threw that aside. Because yes, of course, we have trouble just turning away from pleading families, from people who are being tortured. But the bottom line is when you do that, you give in to the terrorists. And Israel tried to have it both ways. They tried to fight, what we try to do, which is to fight a kinder, gentler war, a war in which you're going to minimize negative publicity and collateral damage. Instead, of course, they got the worst of both worlds, in which they ended up fighting a much messier and much bloodier war that went on and on and on. Because instead of just taking decisive action right away, they tried to figure out a way to square the circle. And there's no way to square the circle. You have to hit the terrorists. You have to hit them really hard. You have to ignore all this. And you have to finish it quickly. When you don't do that, when you try to win the hearts and minds, when you try to avoid civilian casualties, it just absolutely
or conflict with USA. I mean,
yeah,
Netanyahu's had to deal with that since day one.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So they try to give in on various points, and every time the Biden administration would pressure something, we're gonna adjust this, we're gonna adjust that, we're gonna do this another way, we're gonna show that we can do this in a kinder or gentler way. There is no kinder or gentler way. What happens actually is that the civilians themselves become weaponized. When you show that you care about civilians, their civilians, what they're gonna do is use them as human shields. One of the things that happened in Afghanistan when under the Obama administration, the priority was to make sure there was no collateral damage. So we were not allowed, for example, to target mosques when terrorists were inside them. So what did the terrorists do? They began going right inside mosques. When it was stated that you could not actually hit civilians who looked like terrorists, well, of course, all the terrorists began dressing like civilians. So we do this to ourselves by trying to be nice. It ends up being more painful for everybody.
Well, so you didn't tell me what your plan would be. Would it, or maybe you started it, but if you could just back up a week or 2 weeks and persuade President Trump of a different perspective, what would you have said, the main points would be? You don't have to come up with 21 points, but just what would the main points be if, would you just say continue the war until, like in Gaza City, destroy Gaza City, destroy all the tunnels, and flush all of the terrorists out of the tunnels under Gaza City? What would have been the plan?
The uncomfortable reality is you're not going to change anything without actually putting boots on the ground and occupying the territory, processing the population, separating out the terrorists, everybody who was a member of Hamas, was a member of Islamic Jihad, was a member of all these groups, and then dealing with them one way or another, whether it's execution or deportation, because you cannot have terrorists operating and actually running the civilian society, which is what we have now. Chasing after every single armed terrorist, is only going to do so much. Because
terrorism, jihad, whack-a-mole.
Yeah, these guys go into tunnel and forget about it. Then you have to go into the tunnels, you have to chase after them. You have to deal with their actual control of the population on the ground, which means they control the mosques, they control the so-called civilian government, they control aid operations. Until you detain and arrest all of those people, you're going nowhere.
Well, they're not detaining and arresting, they're letting hundreds or thousands go. And I was surprised that there wasn't any mechanism, as you just mentioned, to weed out the terrorists within the strip that are there now, because it seems to me that they need to be deported or executed, as you said, but you're not going to get a deal if you say, well, we'll execute those of you we wish, and we'll leave, we'll send the others away. But was there anything in this this deal that determined where these Hamas fighters or terrorists would go? Because I have an uncomfortable feeling that they would be sending them off to Europe or places like that, where I think that they should go and all live in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. I think they should all go to Qatar. Qatar's got the space for them where the World Cup used to be, and just send every jihadist to go live in Qatar. That's probably not likely. Where do you think that they're going to go?
It would be my preference to put these people on a boat and ship them to Qatar. There's no sign they're going anywhere, really. As far as the agreement goes, there's mention of people being seemingly rehabilitated. That's not the term they use, but a similar term. There's no evidence that Hamas is actually going to be deported in any meaningful fashion from the Gaza Strip.
Well, what about the education system? Did they mention that? Because the reason... Okay, I could go to the Bible and say I know what the reason is for the everlasting hatred, as God calls it. But forgetting going that deep and going back that far, the reality is that you could take any child at 6 months of age and determine you're going to make them a racist, a murderer, a lunatic. You can destroy the mind, the heart, the reason, the soul of any child. The lunatic population of Gaza has been indoctrinated for 2 generations. So how is it that, or what is their proposal to denazify, if you will, like they did in Nazi Germany post-war, or I don't know what you would call it with Japan, but they were genocidal maniacs as well. And, they laid down the law. It was an unconditional surrender, and they replaced, it wasn't 100% successful. Nothing ever is. There was, mistakes or problems, but they replaced university professors and teachers. I don't know exactly what they did in Japan as far as education is concerned, but I believe that they required the rewriting of all textbooks. And you just brought up that the UN was going to be administering the aid or the money, which I did not hear. I did not know that. That is an utter disaster. Do you think that that's going to go forward? So first, last 2 questions, education. What does the treaty say about that? Or it's not, I don't know if it's a treaty, but the deal. And do you think that they're going to go forward with the UN, which is just an utterly evil institution at its very core, so it cannot do any good just by definition in its character.
It's an important point. The education system has been a major problem. The education system has been a Hamas recruitment program. There's no provision in there for meaningfully altering that. There's just kind of some empty talk about deconfliction mechanisms and an apolitical technocratic government, wherever you're going to get one of those. In practice, it just means that the UN is going to be running things. And UNRWA on the ground, the UN on the ground is pretty much Hamas. This, by the way, is routine. It's how the UN and its nonprofits operate. This is what they did in Afghanistan. We saw that they were shipping massive amounts of money to the Taliban through the so-called UN aid programs, USAID, under the Biden administration. So it's going to be the same.